Welcome to the Post-Millennial Mindset, a podcast where fresh perspective meets dynamic discussions. In a world that is evolving at the speed of light, the post-millennial generation stands at the forefront of change, shaping tomorrow's landscapes with their unique insights and bold ideas. Our podcast aims to capture the essence of the post-millennial experience. In each episode, we will dive into thought-provoking conversations that challenge the status quo, celebrate diversity, and also inspire action.
Welcome back to another amazing episode of Post-Millennial Mindset, where we get into the heart of today's pressing issues with a fresh perspective. I'm going to be one of your hosts, Carbel, and I'm joined with my co-hosts, Elyj'ah, Dwayne, as well as a special guest who is one of our 2023 ambassadors, Tabita Mncube.
Good afternoon, Carbel. Yes, it's really a topic that needs to be discussed, and today we will be turning our focus to the vibrant and complex political landscape of South Africa. Looking at apartheid and the challenges to the modern democracy, we'll be unpacking all that. So, listeners, buckle up and be prepared for insightful conversation.
But let's kick things off firstly. We're about to take a journey, if you will, through the tapestry of South Africa's political evolution. The landscape itself is deeply rooted with struggle with apartheid-like conditions, and really a system of institutionalized segregation, which really happened in the United States as well. So discrimination, segregation has gripped the nation for decades. And in the early 90s, the apartheid conditions ended and really marked a monumental turning point in the South African history. But it was really spearheaded by iconic leaders like Nelson Mandela, F.W.D. Klerk. And so upon Mandela's release from prison in 1990, and subsequent negotiations paved the way for the country's transition to democracy. And I really like democracy. So in the historic 1994 elections, I believe one of South Africa's first elections, not first, but truly democratic people's elections. South Africa saw Mandela elected as the nation's first Black president, symbolizing a triumph in justice of reconciliation that the nation really needed.
Thank you so much. Just to add on, honestly, I think apartheid was a phase in the constitution in South Africa where people do not have a say, they do not have rights. It exploited the labor of the South African colors, and the consequences of apartheid still exist till today. And yes, we have made some progress, but we still see some effects there and how it has bruised South Africa as a whole.
I really like what you just said, Tabita, because it brings us back to our points that despite the end of the apartheid regime, South Africa has had a lot of ups and downs in our economy in the last 15 years, following the 2008-2009 global financial crisis, which has also affected South Africa exponentially with nearly millions of jobs lost and a high unemployment rate. And most recently, in 2023, having seen setbacks and advancements to the economy with global factors such as the war in Ukraine, which has affected energy prices around the world, including South Africa, has affected more than just the day-to-day business of operations, but also our already failing power grid.
You're right, Dwayne. And just to touch a bit more on that, it's not only the power grid that has become one of the biggest issues that South Africa is currently facing. We are now seeing increasingly the current state of the government that has become so complex with the political dynamics, and things that I can think about at the top of my head is the power and influence. And with this being said, just the current party in presidency, this is the African National Congress, also known as the ANC. This party has played such a huge and central role. If we're looking back at apartheid, and just ushering the nation into a state of democracy, it was ANC that was at the forefront. And we are now seeing that, despite, that happening, ANC is now facing so many challenges. Like, we are seeing allegations of corruption, internal divisions. We're seeing how the ideology that ANC initially came in with, of liberation, social justice, and empowerment of disadvantaged group being faded away, because there's so many things that's going on. And not only that, but with the opposition parties that's facing against the ANC, we have Democratic Alliance, the DA, the Economic Freedom Fighters, EFF, which is the biggest opposition parties right now. They are advocating for a different type of governance, a different type of democratic principles, and different type of economic transformations that they want to see in the country.
Yeah, you're right. But then despite all their visions and all that, we still face significant barriers in South Africa. Corruption is a major issue, with instances of state capture and corruption at the highest level possible. It is eroding trust in our institutions and undermining our economy as a whole. And economic equality remains a big challenge as well, with many South Africans living in poverty without access to basic services such as healthcare, education, and sanitation, electricity and water being a currently huge problem right now. The gap between the rich and poor is very visible, and it is increasing, and it is a ticking time bomb. Social unrest is also a symptom of these deeper issues. Knowing South Africans, we all know that whenever things don't go our way, we protest. And that adds to how our economy is not stable. And I feel like if this continues, we surely won't have an idea of what we want as South Africans. Surely, like, parties will continue constantly to promise us this and that just to get our votes. So we owe it to ourselves to at least have a voice and stand for all that we want in South Africa.
So before anyone else goes, I'm going to jump in real quick. Personally, I've never been to South Africa before, but I've had the opportunity to research and to actually see what's going on in the news. South Africa's economic recovery, foreign policy engagements, as well as their international relations have become focal points in recent political events, both, at home for me and, at home for you guys and abroad. So some recent political events, the country is really facing severe economic challenges, power cuts, it's called load shedding, I believe, that impact daily life and economic productivity. I mean, you need power to run your business. And I want to know why is South Africa having these immense power cuts, personally, and I have not been able to find the reason for that. But the IMF's positive outlook, as it says here, for sub-Saharan Africa's economic growth is also juxtaposed with high borrowing costs and leading political reviews of eligibility, according to the AGOA benefits. And this bilateral relationship that South Africa has with the U.S., I cannot say much. I cannot say much about what's happening in South Africa better than the people who actually live there. However, what I can say for certain is that they should consider what impacts the votes have on an international basis, and whether or not the changes that could affect the country could impact the world globally. Because when somebody, with your people say, "Oh, my vote doesn't matter," but your vote truly does matter in this grand scheme of things, because it's ultimately you, the three of you, who are being represented, and whoever else is listening, you are being represented, whether you live in the UK, Britain's the UK, America, Brazil, Australia, South Africa, the Congo. You are still, your voice matters, and it's not about who you're voting for in your presidential election or your in your Senate race, but it's about, it's about who you vote for in your local elections, your peace officers, your judges, your who's going to represent you for a county commissioner or whatnot, because those people, circling back to power, are truly who make the difference. Yes, our legislative bodies represent us in when it comes to making laws, but to soothe everyday life, as your county commissioners, your mayors, your councilmen, those are the people that on the fundamental level you write to first before it goes to your Congress, at least here in the States. So I'm gonna hand it over to somebody else who would like to speak, so I don't prattle on.
Elyj'ah, you brought up a very important point of why is there load shedding, right? So South Africa is the biggest coal supplier in the world,
Mhm.
if not the biggest in the world, right? And I think personally, from my opinion, is that it's not a problem of whether do we have enough coal or not. The problem lies in the infrastructure, right? Infrastructure being that we have built facilities that could handle the amount of electricity that should be supplied throughout the whole country. We've seen that in as we approached elections, for example, in that we have had no load shedding. And why is that? It's not a matter of do we have enough coal or not. It's a matter of is resources being allocated properly? Are the resources being used for what they intended to be used for? And what is the government doing to ensure that we have the infrastructure necessary to continue providing electricity for all South Africans as it has provided these past 2 months or so? And to go back into looking as we approach the 2024 elections, we as voters should be asking ourselves, who is best to implement the changes necessary for a better South Africa locally and internationally?
And can I just add that it's a bit concerning to see how much our youth, cannot everyone, of course, but a part of our youth is very ignorant with the election and stuff like that. Because recently I saw a post where they were interviewing two girls, probably our age, stuff like that, and they asked them what the Constitution was, just the meaning of the Constitution, and they didn't know. They asked if they're going to vote, and they say that they didn't care because what does it matter anyway? ANC is going to win. I think that's a bit concerning. And what's more concerning is that people in other countries care more than we do. And we yet stay in South Africa and all that. And they don't even stay there, but they want to see change and all.
So an interesting point that was brought up was political parties, but let's go further back than political parties. Let's look at I pulled up the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, and just looking at the preamble, it is starkly different from the United States Constitution, and that makes me wonder: is it because they were fighting for a different type of freedom? In South Africa, it was fighting for, to put it simply, from racism, for better living conditions, for Black people. However, juxtaposed to the United States, the conditions were different. The conditions were of a oppressive monarch. The conditions were of no taxation without representation. It was for a truly representative government. And it makes me wonder, has South Africa failed at its ability to provide for its citizens? And if it has failed, how can the citizens make it better? So that makes me wonder, our founding fathers fought for different freedoms, but did the founding fathers who fought for the freedoms of South Africa fight for freedom, or did they change the hands of oppression? Did they change the hand? Do they gain a different oppressor? And that's the thing that we have to consider.
Yeah, and what's interesting, is adding on to what Elyj'ah said, what's interesting is that I had an assignment that I was doing, I think a week ago, and it was based on, the freedom in South Africa, because I'm majoring in law. And so it asked if we're really free, in freedom? Like, do we really have freedom, or we just have the idea of freedom? We've been instilled with the idea of freedom. And when I did my research, I actually did get what the question was looking for, and I got what it actually was asking, because I found out that, okay, we have a freedom to vote, yes. We have a freedom to move, stuff like that, things we were allowed to do during the apartheid era. But let's think about it. We barely know the laws that are passed down until they literally published, and they're telling us on the TV or the news that a certain law has been established. We don't have a say on whether that law, we're comfortable with it. It's just, here's the law, we're gonna go with it. We don't really have a say, or we don't really have a platform to vote whether we want that law or not.
I'm actually just going to quickly jump in and give a practical example of what Tabita said. There's a new law that's been passed in South Africa, and it was signed by the president, known as the NHI. And pretty much what this law does, or the purpose of this law, is to pretty much say that everyone in South Africa should have, and apparently now has, access to free healthcare. So private medical centers are pretty much going to operate the same as public medical centers. So this, to be honest, it just came out. You just heard it that, okay, the NHI bill is being passed. Okay, what does it mean? And all of a sudden now you just hear that the private sectors are no longer private. Now they have to operate as a public sector. And now the question was raised, okay, now what effect will this have on medical aid? Now medical aid has no basis anymore, because if healthcare is free for everyone, that means the private sector has no stream of income the way they used to have. And people now have less freedom to choose the type of healthcare that they want to, now that it's accessible to everyone. And another question that this has raised is, where will the funds come from? The funds that is supposed to be used in, that the private sector was making, at least, where will it come from? We already see how the public healthcare system is in dire straits as it is. And now you are passing this law over to make healthcare free for everyone. So many questions were being raised. Okay, are we saying now taxpayers' money is going to come in? One of the biggest questions that came through was, did the public really have a say in this bill before it was signed to the president?
So, whenever a bill is passed regarding regarding public services or any services within any nation's government, you pretty much have referenced that point. Who's going to pick up the cost? And you pretty much answer the question, or the point I was trying to make. It's going to be, is it going to fall on the taxpayers? But with your government situation, I took the liberty of looking up your current bills, and there's bills all the way from 2017 whose status is still pending, and it's about that. And I also looked up the bills in the United States that are pending now, and it comes down to government transparency between the public and the and people within the public, are the people that the government is trying to not subjugate, but relatively help, because that's the point of government, is to help the nation. There needs to be, as John Locke said, a social contract between the man and government. And what it's looking like is there is no, and this contract is not an actual contract, but it's what a citizen can expect, and it's just not there. But and rather than the thing in South Africa that needs to be determined, or rather looked at and examined more closely, is there a new form of government that is needed? There is in America, if the government becomes tyrannical, if the government is not doing what it's supposed to do, which goes back to helping the people, to put it simply, what do the people need to do? Does there need to be reform? Does there need to be abolishment? Does there need to be restructuring? And that's the point that needs to be made, that needs to be looked at. Because if you guys don't know what's going on in your government, are you being truly represented?
Yeah, honestly speaking, with what Elyj'ah has said, it just brings us to the point on how tough it is to vote, like to choose who you want to vote for. Like there's some people who've registered, but they don't really know who they're going to vote for. They registered, they're not sure because of all the promises they've all made, and we really not sure who to trust, because we all know that they'll do no matter what to, get people to vote for them and for them to have a chance at ruling South Africa. But then as South Africans and as the youth, I believe that these elections are a chance for us to shape the future of our country and address these pressing concerns. The outcome will have a significant impact on South Africa, and we may see a hung performance in Parliament and a change in government or coalition government. Whatever the outcome, it's very crucial that we hold our leaders accountable and continue to demand change continuously till eventually we see change in our country.
You're very right, Tabita. And there's so many things that actually comes to mind right now that I just want to mention. And in terms of correlation, actually, and as I said in the beginning, we here to talk about things that's like actually happening right now. There is, this ongoing trend, amongst the people in leadership, that I've seen youth in leadership, that's talking about how it's highly possible that, post-elections, we will see a correlation between a lot of the political parties that are going to happen. And just to go back to what Elyj'ah said, whether or not we are being represented, and just to bring it back in, the context of the youth, the post-millennials, right? One of the biggest factors that's affecting us right now here in South Africa is the unemployment rate. And it's really becoming such a huge factor. And from what I've seen, a focal point in the election that has been brought up multiple times. Because if we look at it, the unemployment rate, especially amongst young people, has been increasing. It's not even like it's going down, it's gradually increasing. And with the latest report that we have within the last quarter of 2023, we are seeing that unemployment is now sitting at 32.1%. And of that 32.1, over 50% of that is young people. And this young people is not just like, okay, out of high school. We're talking people with degrees. We're talking university students that have actually graduated and have the qualifications to be employed, but they are without a job. And the fact that the unemployment rate has seen very minimal to no improvement in the last few years is raising a lot of concerns about what is the government doing? Are they really, as like, are we really being represented? Is the government looking out for us? Or is it now a point, or are we getting to a point where we need to start challenging, what is being done? I personally feel like we are done with being swayed away with, this bold statements and, this bold comments about change. But we really need to now see what is being done. I think that's something that we need to look into, regardless of what political party that's out there. We need to start to look at what are they actually doing. Not these manifestos that we are hearing that, no, they're going to do this and they're going to do that. And I think the focus needs to be like, okay, what has been done? Because despite us having, the presidential or the party in president, each province has, the main political party that's looking after them. And yeah, I think it's just a matter of looking at what exactly has been done. An incident that I can think of right now is, again, this goes back to the presidential parties and all that, is the DA, the Democratic Alliance, has, or recently, this was earlier in the year, they won a court case that actually took them 3 years against the ANC, in which the ANC had to provide all documentations about like the cadre deployment. And just to simply put it, what the cadre deployment is pretty much when a political party sets out to achieve strategic and ideological goals by spreading its influence across different spheres of society, by playing party activists in positions of power in the state. So pretty much in executive positions, right? That is supposed to, assist in serving the society as a whole. At least that's what the point of it is. However, after the case was won and when the DA made a public reveal of what the results were, they found that, despite what was said, there was still a lot of unanswered questions about what exactly people did when they were in power. And if anything else, the people that were deployed, in the terms of serving community, if anything else, it just brought more and more allegations about corruption than anything else. So there's a lot. I want to stop there and give someone else the opportunity to speak before I just continue on, because there's a lot to unpack, honestly.
Politics is complex. I am not one to prattle on about problems without solution, but there are a lot of problems that require a lot of solutions right now in South Africa, I can say for certain, not even as a foreigner, because it's different when you're on the ground and you have to actually be in it. It's easy to be on the outside looking in with any situation. But it takes us young people to have that conversation, to be the change. Well, as Ralph Waldo Emerson said, be the change that you want to see in the world. And that's the important part. We have young activists who are working against climate change. We have people who are working globally. We have Malala working for change in the Middle East. And this is to you listening or watching at home. What are you going to do? What are you going to do, whether you're in South Africa, the United States, the UK, Australia? What are you going to do to impact the world around you? The problems of yesterday's generation fall to us. You may say that it's boring or it's not my problem. If it's not TikTok, it is not news that you want to hear, but it is, because whether it be climate change or a nuclear winter, it falls on all of us, the post-millennial generation, to fix it, to make a better future for yourself and for your children, your children's children, your friends, or whoever comes after you. That is your responsibility, and it should be your priority.
And to add on to what Elyj'ah said, he brought up a very important point of the responsibility truly lies with all of us, not the older generation, not us as the younger generation, but all of us. what can we do as the youth to better our country? And I think it just falls with the little things. First, we deal with the problems in our community before we can look at the broader picture. You can't look at the broader picture when in your community, as Elyj'ah was saying, that we have waste in our communities. We're complaining about waste management. And since we do know that we can't rely on the government, why can't we take it upon ourselves to fix these type of issues? Small issues like this, I think as a country, we've gotten to a point where we know that we can't truly rely on the government for their full support, and that it should fall upon us to take that step. It's just all about the initiative. We should be taking the initiative to helping our communities, and it really starts with community, us being together and deciding what needs to be fixed and how can we fix it.
One thing that becomes the big question, like in the elephant in the room, now becomes knowing with everything that's going on, are we actually taking a change? Or are we as young people, have we become too comfortable relying on the older generations to make the decision for us? However, at the same time, complain about the results. So that becomes, the big question. And if it's the former, to be like, okay, we know there's a problem, why aren't we, taking the initiatives to actually make the change? You understand? And, just looking at it, it again just becomes a question of what are young people actually doing? Are young people taking the steps to vote? Do young people know how to vote? Do young people know what they are voting for? All those things become really, really important.
And yeah, adding on to that, the South African IEC showed that young people between the ages of 16 and 29 made up the majority of their first-time registration voters at 78.31%. This alone tells us that young people are getting involved as they are also desperate for change as the older generation.
Yeah, it's no secret that young people are the key to unlocking real political change. We're not just the leaders of tomorrow, we're the change makers of today. Just look at the Fees Must Fall movement and the climate change protests. We have made our mark just by doing those. But here's the thing, too many young people are disconnected from the political process. We need to get more young voters to the polls and more young voices in the political conversation like this one. And we don't need a lot to get started with that. We can first start by making voting easier and more political education that speaks to young people specifically. We can create spaces for young people to engage in politics, like youth parliaments and political organizations that actually represent us and not just the older people. And I believe that this is important because we bring a fresh perspective and it is shaped by our experiences, our hopes for the future, and we're not just tied down by old party loyalties or ideologies. We're willing to change the status quo and demand real change. And we're driving progress on the issues that matter most: education, healthcare, and economic justice, which is very important to us.
I completely agree with both of you. Elyj'ah, do you want to say something?
Yeah. So Tabita said something that I completely agree with. And so the first president of the United States, George Washington, he warned against political fighting because it's going to obstruct the power or the power of government. And I feel like that's exactly what's happening in South Africa. We mentioned earlier the corruption and embezzling of political funds, and that's exactly what's happening now. And so South Africa as a country is not being able to move and operate as it should. as a beacon, as a paragon, as a ziggurat of democracy, as a ziggurat of change, and as a pillar of Africa as a whole. Just to say my piece, and to put it simply. So to those listening, don't get into politics for a political party, but rather to affect change, to help your community, and to help those around you.
No, 100%. And, I love that we actually are having these conversations from different perspectives. And I feel like that's actually very important because, something Elijah said earlier is that, whatever direction South Africa is going to take, it's not only going to affect those in South Africa, but it's also going to change those who are outside South Africa, but associated with South Africa. So like it's international relations. And again, going back to the point that Tabita and Dwayne mentioned, it is crucial that we as young people have a say, that we as young people are aware, because politics is no longer our parents' problem. Politics is no longer, things for the older people, because as post-millennials, we are at that age where we have the mental capacity to know what's going on. It's not rocket science to know that, hey, the government is not representing you. And just to go back, something that Dwayne said, and Tabita also touched on it, finding political parties that represent us. And something that I actually found interesting, there's also a lot of emerging political parties, aside, this is looking outside the big three. There's a few small political parties that you'd consider, but they are actually closer to young people, like values. A few that I can think on top of my head is like Action SA, Arise South Africa. Those are just a few that have emerged but are slowly gaining popularity because of the fresh views that they're bringing into politics. And I believe that is also something that we should consider. Yes. So with that being said, we have come to an end of today's Post-Millennial episode. It was a lot. A lot was said, a lot of perspectives were shared. And if anything, I just hope that anyone and everyone that's listening to this has gained a fresh perspective or just a new point of view into the dynamic world of South African politics. And I would also just like to say a big thank you to our lovely guest, Tabita, for joining us and just being a part of this enriching conversation.
Thank you very much for having me. It was very insightful and it was amazing talking to you guys.
To those of you at home, remember that real change begins with conversation. So as we have this series, remember that your voice is heard. Be the change you want to see in this world. Affect change.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep that post-millennial mindset alive.
With that, we conclude another episode of Post-Millennial Mindset. Join us next time as we continue our exploration of the issues that matter most in our generation. Until then, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep embracing the post-millennial mindset.